So I'm extremely happy to introduce Professor Dr. Els Bakker. She has a PhD in physiotherapy, and she was heading the research department in physiotherapy at the Free University of Brussels. And she had years and years of experience in bladder and bowel problem in children, more in pediatric, but she also had patients, adult patients. And well, she's going to help you, help everybody understand and get some tips about incontinence. So Els, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I hope I can help you a little bit in coping in an easier way with your bladder and bowel problems. So I have been giving the data of the small research which was done by Alison. And it appeared that if we compare your group to a normal group, that you have symptoms of urge incontinence 5 times more than in a normal population. Normal population is about 10%, and you are about 46%. So that's very high. So one of the topics I will talk about is to explain what urge incontinence is coming from and how you can cope with it and try even to treat it. The other problem I saw in your group is that we have far more bowel incontinence than in a normal group. So the second part of my little talk will be about fecal incontinence and where is that coming from and what you can do to cope with it. So now what's important to know is that in every time when you think about bladder or bowel problems, you have to think in 2 phases. You have a phase which is the filling phase, and you have a phase which is the emptying phase. And sometimes the problems of the emptying phase can give incontinence problems, and sometimes it will be during the filling phase. Now, what is the normal physiological process that all this can work? As well for the bladder as for the bowel, is that at one moment you have to get the information through the central nervous system. The central nervous system is going to have a treatment of this information and will take a decision what he is going to do with it. And then we will have to take that decision to the bladder or to the bowel to execute exactly what you want to do. Now, this is a far more complicated question for the bladder than it is for the bowel. For the bladder, first, what you have to be continent is that you have to have the urine who is coming to the bladder. You can have anatomical problems where urine is not running into the bladder, but running into the vagina, into the rectum, or even running into the urethra under the bladder neck. You have, when the bladder is filling, you have to have a sensation of the need and to have a correct interpretation of what that need is. You have to be able to manage the need, and if we are in the filling phase, you have to be able to postpone the need until the mixture, until the moment you decide to go to the toilet. Then during the emptying phase, you have to start the mixture and you have to maintain that mixture until complete emptying, because when the bladder is not emptying completely, you will have urinary tract infections, and these urinary tract infections will lead to incontinence in his turn. Okay, now what is very important to know, and what is the big difference between bladder and bowel, is that the role of the bladder is to protect the kidneys. So it has to fill at very low pressure and it has to empty without an obstacle. If we have too high pressures in the bladder, then we are at very high risk to have damage to the kidneys. And never anybody died from incontinence, but a lot of people died from kidney insufficiency. So every time when we do something to treat incontinence on the bladder, we will always think first about what is this going to do for the bladder, for the kidneys. Now, I said, well, if we want to have a physiological process, and this is the physiological process we are going to have in the bladder, we have to get up the information to the central nervous system. And that is going to bring the information up through different systems. The first system is a system with our mechanical receptors, which are in the bladder wall. And if you fill the bladder, then you will have a tension on it or you will have pressure. The moment I will close my door. Excuse me. So this tension will send a signal to your brain, and your brain will get this signal and will start thinking, well, what are we going to do with it? If you ignore that signal and you go on filling the bladder, you will have pain. And this pain is coming because you have small receptors which are in the mucosa. So that's already a first sign. If you say, well, I have leakages, but these leakages are always preceded by pain in my bladder, that's meaning that you are filling it too far. Now, what are normal sensations? Well, normal sensations is that at about when your bladder is filled for about half of the normal quantity, you go to the toilet, then you will have a first need who is just saying, well, if ever you still have an hour, but won't be too bad to go to the toilet. When it is filled at 60%, then you will have the second need. And when it's filled at 90%, you will have a third need, which is far more urgent already. Now, is this a simple system? From one moment, and this is a little bit a difficult slide, so I'll try to talk you through it. You see that information is going up from the bladder into the periaqueductal gray, which is a part of our brain where you have a lot of automatic set levels who are happening there, and which is very important for our lives. For example, he's going to decide how fast your heart is going to beat. He's going to take a lot of decisions which are life-threatening. And he will ask a lot of other parts of our brain, and there are just a few here which are represented, but there are about 72 centers now we know in the brain which are involved in the management of the bladder. And then once the decision is taken, it will be again this periaqueductal gray who is going to give the order to a part which is in the brainstem, and the brainstem will either give it an on or an off signal. So you see, if the sympathetic outflow is on, then you will have a relaxation of the bladder muscle and closing of the urethra. And if you have the voiding reflex who is going on, you will have exactly the other side, which is a contraction of the bladder and relaxation of the urethra in order to allow eviction. Now, you can see that big part of the order not to pee is coming from the central brain. This is 99% of the time. The brain will be coping and telling the bladder not to contract until you say, okay, now it's okay, you may do it. But you all know that we have, call it an emergency brake system, which are our pelvic floor muscles. And what our pelvic floor muscles are doing is that they are giving in a sacral reflex, so a very short reflex, which is at S2, S4, will tell the bladder, stop contracting immediately. Why is this reflex? Reflex is always to protect your body. So what do we want to do? We want to protect the kidneys. So we don't want pelvic floor muscles closing at the same time that the bladder is contracting, because then we will have very high pressure in the bladder and urine may go up again to the kidneys, what we really don't want. So when you are doing what we call the pee-pee stop, okay, what you're doing is not closing the urethra and not allowing the urethra, the urine to get through the urethra, but you are telling the bladder to stop contracting. Telling that in two ways. There is a longer reflex, which is going to the pons, which is situated to the lowest part of our central nervous system. And again, what will this center will do? They will bring it into the bladder to say, well, stop, 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 don't contract. I see that there are a few questions coming in. Are you coping with them? Okay. No, just saying hello. No problem. I will have a look from time to time to the questions coming in. So please, if you have a question, ask the questions. That's what we are here for. We are a very small group, so that's really possible to do it. And this is the other side of excitement and getting into urine. Now, it's very logical. As I said to you, when I want to empty, well, I want to empty without any obstacle. This obstacle can be an anatomical one, and an anatomical one can be a prolapse, can be the prostate, but also can be a fecalome, which is an excessive bowel filling, was going to push against the urethra, and it will give an obstacle, a resistance in the urethra. And as always, if you make work a muscle against the resistance, well, what you're going to get is bodybuilding. So you will get a very strong detrusor bladder wall muscle. And this bladder wall muscle will react very quickly to any changes you have and will not allow you to fill the bladder at a normal quantity. But you can also have a functional obstacle, which are the pelvic floor muscles, because you're not able to relax it, and you will see later in this talk what that is going to do, and that's what the tips that I'm going to give you to get this bladder calmer. That's again the same thing. So what we have to talk about is that the management of the bladder, as I said, is bladder inhibition. So we have a central inhibition coming out of the brain into the bladder and telling the bladder the whole time, don't contract, don't contract, don't contract. And then we have to have a system which is going to allow you to have a mixture. A lot of people think that if you go to the toilet and you just relax your pelvic floor, that you start to have a mixture, which is not true at all. Normally, as I said, our brain...
Tell us what mixture is. Sorry.
Peeing.
Okay.
Okay? You have your brain who is going to tell all the time to your bladder, no, no, no. Urethra is closed during the filling phase, of course. Then once there is urine in the bladder, once you are in a safe situation, and that's coming from long, long time ago, but think about a dog running behind you and wanting to bite you. Well, that's not a moment you are going to stop to pee. Okay, you won't be able to pee at such a moment. It has to be emotionally okay. It has to be a place where you say, okay, I feel safe. This is fine for me. Okay, and then it has to be socially okay. If you have these 4 points together, then this will send an okay signal to your head. And what your head at that moment is going to do is he is going to stop to say no. And from the moment on he stops to say no, the bladder will contract and the urethra will open. So you will be able to pee. Okay? That's how it has to work normally. Now, what's going on if you have leakages? When this is not working? You can have two problems, and a lot of people only think about this one. Closure pressure is too low, so that's because we have weak pelvic floor muscles. But they don't think about vesical pressure, which is too high. Now, closure pressure, what is it? It's not only pelvic floor muscles. Pelvic floor muscles are about 30% of the closure pressure. 70% of the pressure is coming from the place of the bladder in the abdomen, is coming from the quality of the fascia, is the quality of the urethra, is lumbopelvic stability. These are 70% of the continence in normal times, and even when you have an increase in intra-abdominal pressure. Now, what is the most common form of incontinence in a normal population is stress urinary incontinence. And this is, according to the ICS, the definition is urinary leakage due to an increase of abdominal pressure. Generally, these are small amounts, and you have exactly the same prevalence of stress urinary incontinence as in a normal population. So this is not really the issue for you. This is also very easy to cope with pads. So this is not really what's giving you a big problem and which is interacting with your quality of life. What's the problem in your group of patients for you is that your vesical pressure is too high. And why is that? That's because either you fill too much the bladder, but probably it's far more a problem of inhibition of the bladder. You have seen that in the slide, the rather busy slide about the neurological control of the bladder, that the prefrontal part, the limbic parts of our brain are working to inhibit the bladder. So it's very logical that if these zones are working less well, that you have a good control of your bladder, and that the bladder is a muscle, and what the muscle wants to do is to contract. So from the moment that he is not enough inhibited by the central nervous system, at that moment he will contract and the bladder pressure will be very high, and that's the moment where you're going to have leakages. So that part of the urgency is what we are going to talk about a little bit more, and where I'm going to give you some tips to cope with it. If it is a problem of filling too much, well, then the solution is very easy, of course, is go more often to the toilet and take your time to empty it. If it is a problem of not enough inhibition and bladder contractions on moments you don't want it, and this can be, I'm going to the toilet and coming just too late, because your brain is saying that the okay signal is when you're nearly at the toilet, but not completely. And that's giving urinary leakages, which are linked together with a feeling of the urge to go. So this is not, I feel that my bladder is filling and filling and filling, and now it is so full, I really need to go to the toilet. This is, I don't feel anything, and at once the bladder is contracting and I feel an urgent need to go. What do we know that's happening in the brain between normal persons and patients with urgency? Well, you can see these are images of the brain working, and the two brain images you have in top are from the control group. So people where everything is working correctly. And you can see that when there is a very small amount of urine in the bladder or a very big amount of urine in the bladder, that the brain is working nearly as much from the small or a lot of urine. And if we now have a look at what's going on in people with poor bladder control, so patients with urgency, you can see that during the filling, when there is a small amount of urine, the brain is nearly not working. So is he not getting the signal? Is he not treating the information? We don't know it at this point. But what we see is that on the moment that the patient says, well, now I really have a big urge to go, then you have a mayday, mayday, everything is working. You're trying to use everything you got to withhold urine and not having the control of it. Just going to a bit while I work at work because it takes so much to walk. Okay, that if this talk can help you to stop doing that, that would be great. Now, what we also know is, that the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain who is going to take the automatic decisions. Now, what we see is that in normal patients, the prefrontal cortex is working to tell the bladder what to do, and that in patients with urge, it's not working at all. It is as the brain is saying, well, listen, you always take the bad decision. Now let it go. I will do it myself. Okay, and he's not taking the right decision. So this is just to make you understand that, of course, we can't go from this to this, but we can go from this to this. And if you learn to better cope with your bladder, to better feel your bladder, then you will have a better management of the bladder. Okay. So this symptom, which is called urgency, is not the same. Urgency can be if the bladder pressure is very high. Well, we will talk about urinary urge incontinence. And if the bladder, if the pressure is not too high and that you don't have leakages, but just have urge, then we talk about dry overactive bladder. So we call this disease overactive bladder. It's really saying what it's doing. It's a nervous bladder who is contracting at moments you don't want it to do. Virginia, does other people have the problem that they can't hear what's going on?
No, nobody's having an issue. We'll work with Virginia on that.
Okay. Now, what can you do to cope with that? Well, it's considering your bladder a little bit like a puppy. It's the same for all of you who already had puppies, and I know Armel is a specialist of puppies training and dog training. It first time when it's coming to you, to your home, he will pee in the house. And then what you're doing, you're just telling him that I'm not happy with that. But if you don't do anything else and just telling him I'm not happy with that, it won't work. So what are you going to do? You're going to take your puppy several times a day out in the garden and say, well, now I want you to pee at this place. And you're going to repeat that as many times as needed until the puppy understood that the only place where he may pee is in the garden. Well, that's what you're going to do with your bladder. You're going to go to the toilet every 2 hours, and you're going, after emptying it, fill it again. So always raise the same amounts, and the amount you will drink will be a little bit in function of your maximal bladder capacity. So you can do the test and try to withhold as long as possible and measure how many urine you have. So if you have a bladder which has a capacity of 250 mils, well, don't drink more than 250 mils because you know it will go to react. Okay, so that's the first thing you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is stop contracting your pelvic floor muscles, imaging that this is going to help to control the bladder. Because if you contract a muscle, well, at that moment, that is as if I want to test the knee reflex, and that I ask the patient to tense their leg, and then I'm testing the knee reflex. It won't work. It's impossible. A muscle to be able to have reflex working has to be relaxed. So that's That's very important that you know that you have to relax your pelvic floor. And then at that moment, you will be able to use it if you need it, if you are still able to contract the pelvic floor muscles. As I already said, that contracting, relaxing pelvic floor muscles, of course, is also necessary in order to void without any resistance, without having an obstacle. If you close your pelvic floor like this man is doing it with his mouth, his nose, and everything, your bladder will have to contract with a lot of power in order to get it empty. And what if it needs to use a lot of power? Well, at that moment, he will get a bodybuilding, the muscle will get thicker and thicker and thicker, and will still be less and less able to let the bladder fill itself. Another important part of relaxing pelvic floor and muscle is because you are not sitting relaxed on the toilet. And if you're not sitting relaxed, you will have reflex contractions of the pelvic floor. And again, you are going into the game where you have an obstruction in the urethra and you are giving power building to your bladder. So don't play interrupting.
Els, can I ask you something? Did you just say that you need to sit relaxed on the toilet?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to ask for this for everyone with
For everybody.
with muscle problems and with
Not only with muscle problems. Everybody. It's
I was just wanting to ask everybody else, when you sit on the, like, if you have the myopathy, when you sit on the toilet, are you kind of like trying to, like, are you tense or are you relaxed? Just because it might be hard to sit relaxed if you're trying to balance.
Exactly. I agree with you, Allison. I would say that I'm at the early stages of all of this, and I'm already tense and trying to engage all my muscles to stay on the potty and actually engage all my muscles to sit down and to stand back up. So I could see that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, then I think it's very important that then you use all the things you can find to get you stable on the toilet. Okay, so there are a lot of things which can help you to sit in a more stable way on the toilet. It's really very important that you try to relax all the muscles and that you take your time to do it. Okay. So probably have a look what you can find on internet, what you can find in the orthopedics shops, what you can use to have a better relaxed position on the toilet, which is really very important, because if you don't have that, you will have at one side, you will have a bladder who will not empty itself, and you will have recurrent urinary tract infections, which will more and more irritate the bladder, and you will have more and more overactive bladder problems. And at the other side, when you're peeing against this obstacle, which is then functional, then you will have a bladder wall who is going, instead of being 2.5 millimeters, it will go, I have seen bladder walls of 12, 13, 14 millimeters. So that's logical. When a muscle like that is going to contract, well, you can't hold it. You will have a complete emptying of the bladder. So it's really an important issue that you try to find a way in a place where you can sit in a correct way on the toilet.
I have a quick question. Sorry to kind of keep stopping you here, but
no problem.
I think that I'm just confused. So kind of what women especially read and are told is that you're supposed to do your Kegel exercises constantly and interrupt your urine stream to help strengthen your pelvic floor muscles and all these things. And what I'm reading here is that's not actually true.
No, it's wrong. It's wrong.
Okay.
It's really what we said. I told them to do it in the 80s. Let's be honest. It's what we told the people to do. And then 10 years later, we saw all this, especially women, coming back to us with who had no more stress urinary incontinence, but urge incontinence and urinary infections. And so the research going on, knowing what we know now, is that we were distracting the people, because in doing interruption of the voidings is exactly saying to the bladder, okay, I put the 4 points up. You remember, there has to be urine in the bladder. It has to be a safe situation. It has to be emotionally and socially okay. You put that together and then you say to the bladder, okay, that's the start signal. Now you may contract. And then once it's contracting, you're telling it now stop, because I'm closing my muscles. Okay, this is creating a big confusion for the bladder, and there's coming a time where the bladder is going to say, okay, I don't play with me anymore. I'm going to do it my way. So please don't do that. Please also stop,
Thank you.
Stop doing pelvic floor muscle exercises in strengthening pelvic floor muscles, because you don't need pelvic floor muscles normally. They just, if we cut the two nerves who are innervating the pelvic floor muscles, people are still perfectly continent. Okay, so it's far more coping. Stress urinary incontinence is a lot of factors together you have to work on. So please, I didn't knew that in the States they were still saying that you have to do pee stop and you have to work Kegel exercises and so on and so on. But it's far more important to have a pelvic floor muscles who can really relax so that you can contract it when you need it, than to have two strong pelvic floor muscles who are always contracted.
So Els, I have a question. This is Cammie. So my question is so I know my core strength is going, and I'm losing my core strength, and I'm guessing pelvic strength as well. So you're saying that's not, with people with this disease, that's not going to be a problem because our minds are going to be able to handle this?
No, in stress urinary incontinence, it's not that much our mind who is going to cope with it. In stress urinary incontinence, it is the fascia, it is the place of the urethra and the bladder in the abdominal entity. It are a lot of different things who are going. And when I looked into the data Addison sent me, I saw that there was no more stress urinary incontinence in your population than in a normal population. Okay, so this doesn't seem really to be the point. Now we can do another webinar on stress urinary incontinence, but then we need another hour to talk about that and how to cope with that. Okay. I can't do everything in 1 hour tonight. That's impossible.
Thank you, Els.
It will be my pleasure to come back to you. If you have other questions and other issues, then it's fine.
Thank you, Els. You answered my question.
Okay. Now, another thing you may not do, and a lot of people are doing that, even in an unconscious way, is pushing while you are peeing. And you're doing that because you think you are going to do it faster. We are always in a hurry. Even at my age, I'm still always in a hurry. And you think you're going to empty better your bladder. Now, there is a reflex system. Again, we have a lot of reflexes in our body who is going to do that. Your pelvic floor muscles will close when you're pushing. So if pelvic floor muscles close, it inhibits the bladder. So again, you're doing the wrong thing. You really need to sit, take your time, relax your pelvic floor, and wait a little bit. So please, peeing is not working. You have to let your bladder do the work and learn it to do it again. And if you are not used to that anymore, or maybe in your disease, I'm not really specialized in your disease, it might be that your mixture you're avoiding will come in several times. Well, let it come in several times. Even if it takes you 5 minutes, that's not too bad, because if you don't empty it completely, you will have to go back very early. So please empty it completely and take your time to do that. And I always ask my children, which I have in treatment, to count at least jusqu'à to 10 after ending the voiding, so to make sure that there is not a little bit more coming out of it. Okay, 350 mil is good, Camille. It's not too bad. Normally, it's about, you can go to 400, 500 mils without problems. Okay. And yeah, 250 mils is about a cup. Okay, now are there more questions about the urinary part? Because we are now going into the bowel part. You still have questions? It's clear? Okay, now we are going to the anal-rectal part. Again, you have two phases. You have normally the fecal material is storaged in the sigmoid, higher up. When it gets into the rectum, you will get a first sensation of the need. Then you will get the sampling reflex, and I put that in red because that's a very dangerous period. And either you decide to postpone the defecation, either you decide to initiate the defecation, and then again, you will have to maintain the defecation until complete emptying. So this means that we have again a period of continence and defecation. And of course, what's different between bladder and bowel is that if you have in the bladder, you always have urine and it's liquid. And bowel, well, it can be liquid, it can be very solid, or it can only be gas. Now we have in the anatomy, when we go to anatomy, we have a capacitive system and a resistive system, like in the bowel, but there is a difference. The fecal content will be stored in the sigmoid, and you will have under the sigmoid the rectum, a rectum which has a sacral part, a perineal part, and then finally the anal canal and the external anal sphincter. And these are the pelvic floor muscles who are just forming a hole where the perineal part of the rectum is just lying down in it. Now you already see that you have hooks. You have hooks between the two parts of the rectum, and you have a hook between the rectum and the anal canal. So if we look to this in a little bit more detailed way, you see that you have the sacrum, which is the last part of your body. And the sacrum is lying in this sacral bones. There is the first hook, which is we call the sacula. Then we have the perineal rectum. The part underneath is the closing part, which is the anal canal. And the anal canal, again, is the smooth muscle. So we can't command it. And normally in your disease, it won't be affected. And the anal canal is giving 90% of the rest closure pressure. So that's a very important part with all the time closing. External anal sphincter is during the day only helping for about 10%. Now, when we look into the pelvis. This is the pelvis of a woman. You see, because there is a uterus, you have the vagina, you have in front the bladder, and the guys who made these pictures, well, they picked up the right colors. And then you can see that you have the sacral part of the rectum, then you have the perineal part, and as I told you, the perineal part of the rectum is really laying down on the pelvic floor muscles, on the part behind of the pelvic floor muscles. We have the anal canal and the external anal sphincter. What you can see here, you can see it just a little bit, is the puborectalis muscle. And this is a muscle that when it's going to contract, it's going to take everything to the symphysis pubis. So symphysis pubis, pelvic bone here, which is in front. So you will, if you contract the pelvic floor muscles, you will have a hook which will increase between the rectum and the anal canal, and between the rectum, the two parts of the rectums, and you will crush the urethra against the pelvic bone. So these hooks are very important because you can understand that if you have solid stool, these hooks are going to help you to be continent, because it will work as a stop. If you have really a fecal continent which is solid, it will stop on the hook in the sacula. If you have liquid stools, of course, liquid, no problems with a hook. It will just run around and come directly on the anal canal. Okay? External sphincter, as I told you, are the sphincters. External sphincter is what really at the end of the tractus, and the anal canal is a very small canal, which is about 2-3 centimeters, and which are smooth muscles. Okay, now Les Bakker, which was a coloproctologist from Belgium, made a scheme which for me is very clear and easy to explain. And I will go with you through the 6 steps, and then you will understand where your continence problems can come from. So at the start, fecal material is in the sigmoid, as I told you, and the rectum is empty. There should never be fecal material storage in the rectum. That's one very important point. Then 1 to 3 times on 24 hours, you have a mass movement. Generally, it's about 20 to 40 minutes after the meal. You have a mass movement, and the mass movement will bring the fecal content into the sacral part of the rectum, the highest part of the rectum, as it is drawn here. And then you have the feeling that there is something, and maybe you need to go to the toilet. But it's impossible to say how much it is. It's impossible to say if it is liquid, if it is gas, or if it is solid. Now, the fact that there is fecal material in this part of the rectum will give that the muscle, which I show you in pink on the other image, you remember, it will give a horizontalization. So instead of giving a support to the perineal part of the rectum, it's just flipping back and going to give that the sacral part and the perineal part, that the fecal content can go on and go down. And this is because you have a propulsive rectal contraction. You're still not doing anything. All this is fully automatic. Then once you have this, the fecal content in the perineal rectal part, so the last part of the rectum, then you will get an automatic contraction of the external anal sphincter and the relaxation of the anal canal. And that's very dangerous, because the presence of the fecal content in this part of the rectum, where you can't say if it is a gas, a liquid, or solid, you have to allow a sampling reflex. And this sampling reflex is going to have some fecal material go into the anal canal until about 1 centimeter from the external anal sphincter. And there you have a part where the ecto and the endoderm in the embryology joined together, and where you can really feel if it is a gas, if it is liquid, or if it is solid. But of course, if your external anal sphincter didn't contract correctly before the sampling was done in the anal canal, then the sampling will go directly into your pants. So we have 3 different reflexes there. You have the rectal reflex, you have an inhibitory rectal anal reflex, and an excitatory anal rectal reflex. So this is what's the normal situation. Once you did this sampling reflex, what you will have is, if you decide to go to the toilet, well, you will let the anal canal will be open, and you have a relaxation of the external anal sphincter, which will allow you to have a normal bowel movement until complete emptying of the rectum. Once the rectum is completely empty, what will happen is that you have to restore the normal situation, and you will have some contract reflexes of the pelvic floor, of the external anal sphincter, which is going to bring everything back to the normal situation. Okay? If you decide not to go to the toilet, at that moment, you are contracting your pelvic floor, and everything is sent up again to the sigmoid and will be stored in the sigmoid until you get a next mass movement, a reflex, which is when you're going to have your next meal. Okay? Which means that between it went down and it went up again, and the rectum again is empty. Now, the big problem we have is that if we have constipation, or if you have, and constipation, one of the criteria is having bowel content in the rectum, just not having an empty rectum, then what will happen is that you are going to trigger several times a day, several times an hour even, this sampling reflex. And in telling the anal canal to open, well, you will have less tonus in the anal canal. It will stay open a little bit. So you will have fecal material or fecal liquid, because when fecal material is in the rectum, you will have an irritation of the mucosa. So you will have more fecal liquid coming through, and external anal sphincter, it is not made to withhold that. It's impossible for him. If you have a very good external anal sphincter, you can hold it 30 seconds, but you can't hold it more. That's already Schwarzenegger. You do a great job if you can hold it 30 seconds. So what you have to do, of course, is make that your rectum is empty. And that means an empty rectum is continence in about 95% for the cases. So now, how can you get an empty rectum? There's one system, it's not eating for 3 days. And then you will have normally an empty rectum if you have normal bowel movements, okay? But I don't think that's a really good advice. What we advise our children with neurological problems is to wash out the rectum. And so they get a social continence, which is very, very important. And if you wash out your rectum, and now you have systems which are very easy. I put one here, which is from Coloplast, the Peristeen. I don't have anything to do with them, but it's a good system. You're cleaning the rectum, and then you'll be continent for 1 day. It depends. Some persons who have a very slow bowel movement, it might even work for 2 days, but generally we say, okay, do it every day, clean your rectum in the morning, and you will be sure that you will able to pass the day without any accidents during the day. Another system which might help when it's about not too important fecal incontinence, don't use it all the time, but sometimes when you want to go out, it might be helpful, are anal plugs. These anal plugs are also made, I think, by Coloplast. And they are giving like a little cup, so you're posing them just above the anal canal. So you have to get it 2-3 centimeters inside, so you can put it there where you have the hook between the rectal part, the perineal part of the rectum, and the anal canal, and it will stay there and withhold fecal material. It's not 100% safe system, but it's not too bad. It's already better than nothing. Now, what you have to know also is that in cases of constipation, constipation can irritate the bladder. So you have all this is so close one to another that if you have the presence of a fecal content in the rectum where it should not be, and this is pushing against the bladder, well, the bladder will react and will be overactive. So that's what I wanted you to talk, maybe give you some tips on what you can do. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
So Els, thank you for that. Where does irritable bowel syndrome kind of fall into all of this? Is that something upstate, upstream that's happening, or what? Yeah,
irritable bowel syndrome is unfortunately working on the content of the bowel, and you will go from constipation to very liquid stools, so that's very difficult to cope. Then what we try to do with those patients is asking them really to find out in their diet what's going to work, and to really write down everything they do and put on what was the effect on the bowel content. And sometimes you're able. So this is yeah.
But that can lead. I mean, that can lead to some incontinence. I mean, if things aren't being processed right, I mean, it just comes, right? I mean, right?
When you have liquid stools,
yeah.
Okay, that's you will have reduced autonomy, like they call it, and you can't withhold it. Nobody can withhold it. It's impossible. Okay, so you really have to in liquid stool, you can't do anything against it. That's for everybody.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's unfortunately we can't. At that point, the external anal sphincter is really not made. The anal rectal system is not made to withhold liquids. It is made to withhold solids. So it's not the same system as the urinary system. And if there is liquids, then it will pass by. That's unfortunately, it's like that. Okay.
I have two questions. Can you hear me?
Virginia, I know you got your phone on. Yeah, make sure you mute one of the devices there. Just one device. Yep. Go ahead. We can't hear you now.
You muted your microphone, Virginia.
Yeah. Or unmute your phone. Yeah. We can't hear you, Virginia.
Brandon, probably you can put her micro on.
Yes, hang on just a second here. Virginia, you should be prompted right now on your computer to unmute. Okay.
Yes,
Right.
okay.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
you are.
remove your phone. Hang on just a second.
Then I won't be able to hear you.
Can you mute your phone right now?
I can't lift it.
There you
Okay.
So it's okay, never mind.
No, it's okay.
No, we'll figure it out.
I can hear you.
Can you give me my phone?
Just a second, everyone. Thank you for your
Mhm.
patience. Okay, so
Wait, she's muted again. Deactivated the micro.
Virginia Helper, if you can unmute her computer, but make sure her phone mic is muted. Which it shows it is, but
We can't hear you, Virginia. Send her again an invitation to mute, Brandon.
I think she's trying to say it's okay.
Okay.
It's too much work. I got you, Virginia. I read lips now. Love you, honey.
Okay, now what I think about is, I don't know if you know the neuromodulation, which is using a very small machine, which is giving a very low frequency current. I maybe have here one to show you. Little machines like this. And you just put on the electrodes on sacral level. Okay. And when you use that 30 minutes a day at about 10 hertz and 250 microseconds, it might give an effect as well on the bladder as on the bowel. We try it in children when we have neurological problems, and it's giving good effects. We still don't know how it's working. We try to figure that out, but we never had somebody who had side effects. And we generally see that the bladder capacity is increasing, the bladder is getting calmer, and it's giving a relaxation of the pelvic floor muscles. So you can try it maybe. But it won't change anything on irritable bladder syndrome, of course, Nathan. That won't work. So it's maybe worth trying it.
well, I think the issues I have at times is the little, whatever you call it, little stool. I mean, it's something diet or a combination of things. And, you know, I've figured out at times that it's caffeine. You know, if I lay off the caffeine, it gets better, but
I can do that too, Nathan. I can go from, like terrible constipation to like really liquid stools. And I like, is IBS something that people with VCP disease struggle with? Like I've never been diagnosed with IBS. So
I don't know.
I haven't either. That's why I asked though, because it's usually gurgling of stomach, and then it just is a 5-alarm fire that comes, and it's just sudden, it's instant, you know, it's 30, you mentioned Els, 30 minutes after eating, you're supposed to get a response or something, you know, something's happening, and it's holy smokes, it just, then it's over, you know, and you said nobody can stop it. So, but I don't know why. I mean, because I used to have an iron stomach, you know, so
But
now
it has nothing to do with the stomach. It might be interesting to go to see a coloproctologist and to see if he can do something on your bladder. Because probably if you can get more solid stool, then you will have less problems. So maybe, but I don't see the link between your disease and irritable bowel syndrome, because the IBS, like we call it, is really something local. It has nothing to do with central. The bowel is working in a quite other way than the bladder. So I don't really see what's the link. So probably it's out two diseases, and you should see somebody who can help you with that one.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Kim.
No, that's okay. I was just going to interject and say, Nathan, I understand, because I have been diagnosed with irritable bowel, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's hard to know if it's part of this or not. It could just be nerves, because I know nerves add to it, and heck, you are under a lot of pressure. I know certain foods, and it's not a half an hour after I eat. It can be like within 20 minutes, 15, you know.
Yeah, but it's not what you have been eating at that moment. What's given is that you have, when I explain it to the children, I always say, well, you have a cook who is at your stomach, and you have a guardian who is at the sigmoid, the caca garage, I call it. And then you have somebody who is coping in opening the garage or not opening. So from the moment you are eating, the cook is phoning to the guy who is controlling the garage. And it's that way. It's not because what you're eating at that moment that it's going to give this reaction. It's because you're eating whatever you eat, it will give this reaction, and it will give this mass movements, which are far too important, and which are going to accelerate the bowel movements. And so it won't have the time to withhold water. And so you will have very liquid stools. But I don't really see the link between your disease and IBS. I really think that are two different things happening, and maybe you can learn to better cope with IBS, because again, it's something you can't really heal of it. You have to learn to live with it.
But do you find it interesting though that at least 3 different people have brought it up? And I know my mother, I mean, had issues. Like, I mean, they would not eat when she traveled, you know, just because of the potential of, you know, and it's, for me, yeah, I agree with Cammie. I mean, some of it's nerves, especially when I'm not at home, you know, when I'm traveling, and the just threat that I'm not at my home bowl or, you know, something, I just don't eat. I don't eat or drink until I know I'm kind of an hour away from home. But I do think some of that's psychological though. So,
well, stress is interacting a lot on IBS, but the bowel, it's the innervation of the bowel is easier than the innervation of the bladder, and less interacting with what's going on in the central nervous system. So it has its own, why we call the bowel very often second brain, because it's coping himself with a lot of things. There's the Meissner plexus, there's the Auerbach plexus, and they are working together, and there are a lot of things playing in the bladder we still don't understand. There are so many things we don't understand in the middle of the world. So small, so little things we do understand, but we know that that's a problem at that level. So
That, oh, go ahead, Cami.
My question too is that, you talked about an anal plug, and then, for like women, there's pads and so forth that we can wear for our liquid incontinence. But I know, like, when my dad was in this stage of things, he wore a condom catheter. Is that something that you can speak to for the men in this group? That because my dad would just put on a condom catheter and then he could go and travel, and part of that wasn't just because of any leakage, it was actually just because so many of the bathrooms are not able for my mom to go into the bathroom to help him sit down on the toilet, or stand at a urinal or whatnot.
yes, of course, that can help. It's a very easy system. You just put a little bag on your penis, and if you're peeing, it's going into a bag which is attached to your leg. So this has been developed for men after prostate operations, but of course, it can be used. It can be helpful, because the big problem with pads is that when the leakages are coming little by little, you can put nearly 1 liter in it before it's going to overflow. If you have a complete mixture and complete voiding, and that half a liter is coming at a time, then it will always overflow. The pads are not able to withhold that. Yes, I agree. Bowel issues is very genetic. It's really going from one family to another. So what would be interesting is in your group to have a look if there are more bowel issues in your group than in the general population, because in the general population, it's very high.
I wonder, maybe if it's not IBS, maybe, I mean, obviously there's muscle weakness and muscle problems, and kind of your GI tract has musculature and things like that, and the constipation may come from weaker muscles, and maybe the liquid stool is a part of the constipation issue, kind of the after effect of that. My aunt struggled a lot with bowel incontinence, but my dad did not, and I think he probably was in the same situation with Nathan, in that he didn't eat. So
that's a solution. It's like I said, if you don't eat, it's empty.
Right.
And the other way is to empty it before you leave. Then you won't have problems. Then you can have contractions. But if there's nothing in it, it can't come out.
Right. Now,
it's
my
not going in
question,
50 minutes from your stomach to your rectum. No way.
okay. So my question is, and I don't know, Armel, if bowel or colorectal cancer is on one of the lists of the more prevalent cancers. Now, is this constipation liquid stool, does that increase your risk even more for that type of cancer?
I don't know that. Do you know that? If it increased the risk of cancer? Yes.
Frequent constipation or something?
IBS can increase the risk of colorectal cancer, because you have polyps, and the polyps can evaluate into something in a cancer. It's why when we have patients with IBS, we do more often, we're checking them more often. Okay. But that's the only reason. And as somebody said, well, I have irritable bowel, but that's coming from the mother side and not of the family where there's the VCP. So,
but if you've not been diagnosed, if you've not been diagnosed with IBS specifically, then the constipation wouldn't necessarily increase your risk of cancer alone.
No.
Okay.
No. No. But what the problem with constipation is that it will increase the risk of overactive bladder on one side, and it will increase the risk, of course, of having what we call false anal incontinence, because it's like a sort of overflow incontinence, because you have this opening, this sampling reflex going on and on and on and on. So you really have to empty the rectum. So there is a direct link about 50% constipated, 50% of people who have constipation have anal incontinence. Okay, and but you have this is 95% of people who have incontinence. The other 5% is what we call real incontinent people, which are people who don't have an anal canal, who don't have an external anal sphincter, and who have anatomical problems, why nothing is working. But I really think that in your population, it's rather linked to the going on. And I don't think what I understood from your disease is that it's affecting striated muscles and not especially smooth muscles. And you don't have any striated muscles in the bowel. So that's not existing. This is all smooth muscle. So normally it should not be affected by your disease. But I say, I'm not a specialist of your disease, so I haven't done research into that. Colon polyps, yeah. But I think that, again, these are topics you have that very much in a normal population, so it would be interesting to see. Yeah, is there more irritable bowel syndrome in your? Can you say, okay, this is coming from the side, from my mother's side, whereas no VCP, or from another side? I don't know. I really can't say it. I can't answer that question. So I think it might be interesting, Armel, to address the topic, and if it seems to be really an issue to see with a coloproctologist what might be the link, and we have a lot of drugs to help people with that.
Well, look, this was extremely helpful to me because I'm terrible at biology. So I mean, there is a differentiation, Els. I mean, you've explained how there's a differentiation between kind of the muscles and everything down there, and, you know, versus it might be bowel, you know, so we need to be asking those questions. I mean, we need to, you know, differentiate between it. So thank you very much. This was very helpful. So,
thank you. You're welcome.
I mean, it's a topic I don't like to talk about, but
right. It's a pretty crappy topic.
Now I know the difference. I didn't know the difference. So
well, you know, every time when I go to a dinner, there's always somebody who has continence problems. So I know.
I don't have incontinence problems now. And so I need to quit using that word. I've got, you know, it's something else. It's bowel. Something bowel. So thank you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So you were saying that the normal population has a lot of bowel issues. What do you know the percentage of the normal population that has bowel issues?
About 30%.
30%?
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And people take about 10 years before they come to a consultation. I remember once, and that's not such a long time ago, about 2 years ago, was a guy coming with his son, 14 years old, who had really very bad bowel incontinence. And the guy had no self-esteem and was really going very bad and things like that. So I felt like it was not helping the guy. I really felt as I wasn't happy. Armel, en français, on dit de l'abus. Maltraitance.
He was abusing. That's
yes,
abuse.
Abusing, non maltraitance de l'enfant.
Maltraitance, c'est abusing.
Yeah,
Abusing children, c'est des enfants maltraités.
And I thought, oh my God, how is this possible that they wait so long for that? And then I gave a lot of advice, and I gave him exercises to do, and that was always there. And then after 1 month, they came back on my consultation, and the father told me, you know, you changed my life. Okay, I have this problem since 45 years. Okay,
Oh.
people don't talk about it. It's a shaming something to talk about. So it takes a lot of time to come up with the problem, and people don't know that we have issues and that we really can help them. So that's why when somebody asked me to give a little talk about this, I think it's interesting, because you're going to spread it along. So more people will know now not to do pee-pee stop, not to strengthen pelvic floor all the time, be careful with constipation. Okay, and we will move on.
I will tell you that I sent a message to a group of my friends when you told me that. And a friend of mine, there's a physical therapy place in a town about 15 minutes from here that focuses specifically on the pelvic floor. And they told a gal to stop doing Kegels. They told her that her pelvic floor was far too tight and she was harming herself. So little by little, we're learning in the US.
Oh, no, everywhere. We're moving. We're moving. A lot of have moved, you know. When I started and the first times you said, okay, you have to work your pelvic floor muscles and every day and do your exercises. And then people ask me, and how long do I have to do my exercise? I always told them, no, 1 week before dying, you may stop. We now know that that's big nonsense. But we told them to do it. But we don't tell them anymore. So it will change. It will change.
Research
Well,
goes.
Well, are there any other questions before we wrap things up for today?
Okay, then I wish you all good luck with coping your bladder and bowel.
Thank you.
If ever there are problems, please contact Armel or Alison, and they can always come back to me if I can help, if I know something which can help. I will be happy to help you.
Just so everybody